Good morning, everyone. What a nice turnout. Welcome to the TIFF Industry Conference. I'm your conference programmer, Karina Rotenstein. Welcome. Just before we get started, I'd like to thank the original keepers of this sacred land, the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat for hosting everyone here today and every day. Thank you to them. Today's session, Eve of Disruption, is part of the Dialogues program, and we'd like to thank the Ontario Media Development Corporation for their support. Just a final reminder, there is no photography or video recording, but not to worry, we're taking care of that for you. We are live streaming all of our sessions onto our website and YouTube. And also, please feel free to tweet using our hashtags, and please communicate and engage with our online audiences tuning in. This morning's timely conversation addresses the unprecedented changes happening in the industry at all levels, from content production, investment, to distribution and audience engagement. Yet something is brewing in the emerging technologies sector, and it is challenging the traditional models of the film industry. Our assorted panel of experts represent the multifaceted perspectives required to uncover the future of cinema and where content is headed. We have a great group of guests, so I'm very excited. First up is Mark Chardy, founder, president, and CEO of Apex Entertainment, a global media and entertainment venture, bringing together entertainment, sports, technology, and great storytelling for a new era of consumers. Mark has a rich breadth of experience as a film executive, producer, and director. Prior to joining Apex, he co-founded Mayhem Pictures, which that had an overall first deal look with Walt Disney Studios for 12 years. That company produced The Rookie, Miracle, Invincible, The Game Plan, Secretariat, and $1 Million Arm. Apex Entertainment also produced Chappaquiddick, which is a gala presentation here at TIFF, directed by John Curran, and screens on Sunday, September 10th at 3 p.m. at Roy Thompson Hall. So make sure you go see it. Our second guest is Matthew Liebman, Senior VP of the Americas for Movio. Matthew oversees the worldwide strategy and operations for Movio's flagship product, Movio Cinema, the leading marketing, data analytics, and targeted campaign solution for cinema exhibitors. For almost 25 years, Matthew has focused on the entertainment and media sector with a track record of helping cinema exhibitors adapt to advancing technology and changing guest expectations. That's Matthew. Aaron Levitz is the head of Wattpad Studios, a global multi-platform entertainment company focused on producing original and engaging story-based content. Previously, he was the Director of Entertainment and Content Acquisition at BlackBerry, the Senior Director of Strategic Alliances at Extreme Labs, and prior to his promotion, he was the Head of Business Development at Wattpad. That's Aaron. And last, we've got Prashant Mehta, the Senior Associate of Omar's Ventures. Prashant is a venture capitalist at Omar's Ventures, where he is responsible for investing in leading media and technology startups. His previous positions include a senior consultant at Deloitte in Toronto, and a global strategist at Samsung, where he led projects involving business strategy, product development, acquisitions, and investments. So that's our panel. And the chair of our panel is Patrick Frater, the Asia Bureau Chief of Variety, and with over 20 years of writing experience about and on the film industry, his publications have appeared, including Variety and Screen International. He also co-founded the trade publication Film Business Asia. Please welcome to the stage all of our guests.
Is the microphone working? Yay! Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the kind words of introduction, Karina. We have four estimable gentlemen, all male panel, by the way, I noticed that. Boo! Who booed?
You're right.
Well, thank you for that. At least some feedback. I know where to come to for the Q&A later on. I have not met these gentlemen before this morning, which is an interesting thing. I often do panels and do it with people I know quite well. So it's going to be a bit of an exploration for me as well. Hope you bear with me. If I don't ask the right questions, we will have a Q&A towards the end. And I guess most of you are producers, distributors, filmmakers. Is that correct? Yep. That's kind of a yes. Thank you very much. So we're going to focus. There's so much to do with disruption and technology that so many different angles that we could take. But I think we're going to focus mostly on the creative process and the distribution and marketing processes. And then if we feel like it, we might go further into finance, pure technology, and other stuff. But before we do that, I have a very general and slightly dangerous question for all of the panelists. Over what time frame, gentlemen, should we be looking at the future? Because I'm sure that far more things change in a 10-year horizon than we might imagine. The iPhone is only 10 years old, and yet probably less happens. We overestimate what's going to happen in the next 2 years. Discuss. You're nodding, so you're my first victim.
Yeah, look, gut instinct to me says 3 to 5 years. A lot can happen in that time. It's not tomorrow, but it's not so far off into the horizon that it's too cloudy to even see. I think we're starting to see broad brushstrokes on the way people want to consume content and the way that the legacy forms of entertainment, and we're largely in the cinema channel, are responding. So that feels like the right horizon from my perspective.
3 to 5. Mr. Investment.
So, as an investor and being a venture capitalist, I generally have more of a 10-year horizon. We see a lot of nascent technologies today. But I will say, though, what we've learned historically, change happens faster than most people can predict. So, you can say 5 years, you can say 10 years. Some technologies are adopted way faster than others, but it remains to be seen how the future will evolve. But I would say 5 to 10 years.
Aaron, you going to split the difference?
No, I'm going to go 1.5 years ago. I think change has already happened, and what you're talking about 5 or 3 or 2 years is when everyone will catch up to it. And that's probably the most interesting place we sit today, is helping those big entertainment giants in their creative process, in their marketing process, understand that if they didn't act 1.5 years ago, they're already too late. I mean, you're watching, forget change in where people are viewing things. We know that's going to happen. How you're choosing the things you're going to view, what you're being told to view, that's changing under our feet today. You don't have to wait to see where that is. VR, AR, that's still down the road for all of us to come into, but the creative process is already changing.
Yeah, I would say, I would take the under on it. I think it's 2 or 3 years. I mean, you look even as an example, with Netflix coming in, with House of Cards was only 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. It didn't really exist as a content creator. So, they came on the scene. Now they produce more content than all the studios, combined, as far as how much they spend on it. So that's pretty staggering. And now you have Amazon as well. You have Hulu, but you have Facebook coming in, Apple coming in. So on that side of things, you have that new technology, and then you have the old media companies, the studios and the independents and typical box office. So as a producer, you got to feel like where do you fit in as a content maker. So that's, I think, the challenge and also the exciting part of it.
Well, now we're going to focus a little bit more on the content production side, if we may. I'm recalling a conference I was at about 1.5 years ago, where a company, which I'm not going to name for obvious reasons, it's a streaming company with lots and lots of data, also involved in production, saying, they said very clearly at this conference, we don't need screenwriters anymore because the audience is writing our material for us already. That struck me as incredibly optimistic.
They're probably out of business.
Well, they're not out of business, but I think they've changed their model. What are the changes that are taking place in this writing and creative process? And who's got it right, and who's already had to change their models?
I mean, speaking as a producer, I don't see anything changing as far as, it all comes down to the script. That's what I say to anybody coming into the business. If you don't have it on the page, it's not gonna show up on the screen. So that's most of what producers do, is develop scripts, develop more, and you get it to a certain point. And then, if you attract talent, you can attract talent. that's going to be the true test of a screenplay and its ability to get a filmmaker on board and then to cast it correctly. And then you got to look at what the value of the film is and, run models and, it'll tell you if it should get made, and then you hopefully pick correctly and execute, when you're shooting.
That sounds a very hands-on and traditional way of doing things, if I may characterize it as that. And perhaps the long-form way of doing script writing.
Right. But yeah, there's unscripted and digital, everything from 1 minute, 30 seconds, all the way up. But yeah, yes, that content is content, but
Sure.
I'm a traditional, producer.
May I?
Please.
Please.
This was your cue, really.
Oh, I love it. It was lovely. So that is a way to do it.
Yeah.
But what you brought along that process was people's gut feel, a whole lot. So a screenwriter got it right, and then a director got it right, and then marketing got it right. That's the old way of doing things. That's batting average. That's hoping that the development exec you started with today can continue to hit 300 because they had 3 good choices in a row. That at no point in there did you involve audience until the box office. And that is the antithesis how content is going to be made, which is let's start with audience. Let's find out what they're actually interested in. So you speak of streaming services that are doing this today. On Wattpad, we have 60 million users coming every month to read, write, and tell stories. We know what stories are trending. We know, and this is still an underlying IP stage, that we can look at a story that 130 million reads last year, like a story called Chasing Red, and say, yeah, audience like it. But we also know what paragraphs they like because they comment on them. So we see the subtext. So when it comes to writing a script, and we'll still get a great scriptwriter on that project, they can now understand the audience liked this character, the audience didn't like this character. Oh, I need to cut a scene, let's cut this one instead of that one. They can even ask the audience, if I had to change a character, add a best friend, what makes sense? And all of a sudden you've changed the creative process, the development process, which has always been a black box, nobody knows what's going on in there, to a glass room. And now you have a better chance of success because your development is actually marketing. You're actually bringing the audience with you. So I think when you talk about the future, especially in the creative processes, it's not about the black box anymore. It's we have access to audience, we have access to data, we can make better choices earlier in the process. And this is not development by numbers. Do not always listen to every single point, but it's using that to make better informed decisions in the creative process.
Was Wattpad started as a story company, or was it the long-term goal always to actually start making movies and TV shows yourselves?
I think day one, the company's about 11 years old, come this November. It started as a reading and writing forum. It really started as a social network based on reading and writing. I'd say as early as 5 or 6 years ago, we saw the obvious adaptation pieces. And it started with traditional publishing, where in the next year we'll publish about 100 different titles as Wattpad with major co-publishers all over the world, but obvious adaptations, whether it's TV, film, digital, VR, gaming, the underlying IP with built-in audience, that audience wants to follow it to different mediums, and we're already seeing that from what we're doing.
Just so I can add to that, you take that wealth of data, and there are companies and startups out there that are automating script writing. So they're using technologies such as machine learning or artificial intelligence and predicting, based on all of this data they're seeing, predicting how a script should be written. But in my opinion, talent and content are core to the sector, so I don't think that'll go away. I think technology will be there to assist and help, but there are companies out there that are trying to automate script writing, and that's really interesting.
And will it succeed, automated script writing? I get automated news stories, and I find them unreadable.
There's a ways, when you talk about machine learning or AI, and we have about 10 to 25% of our company working on that right now. We collect 1 billion points of data every day. And so to understand not always what the next line should be, but look at the subgenres of horror that are trending. Dentist horror, super hot. That's your freebie, super hot right now. If there's 40 dentist horrors at TIFF next year, I'm really sorry, but whatever. But machine learning is getting better and smarter, and it's going to help if creativity is a series of really amazing, awesome, cool, arbitrary decisions one after another, we're going to help make a few of those decisions better with machine learning today. But you want to talk 5, 10 years, automation in the creative process will get stronger and stronger.
I agree.
So my streaming video company was just 10 years too early.
Yes.
Oh, dear.
I hope you still kept the name. You can launch it anytime now.
Oh, I think you know the name. One of the notes that you guys forwarded to me earlier on was suggested that data is a replacement for demographics. What did that mean?
Look, for me, when I look at the industry historically, you try and find, you have a piece of content, you have a movie, and you say, this is going to appeal to older males or younger females or families. And that's because you have to deal with this clustering. But when you have one-to-one data, when you know what individuals like to do and spend their time and money on, you can break through that. So, using a theatrical example, our bumper sticker is, we don't care if you're an 80-year-old woman seeing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or a 16-year-old boy seeing Philomena. You don't have to lump people together with the broad brushstrokes of what the content looks like. You can go one-to-one. Now, marketers may still want the demographics because mainstream media still buys bluntly, and you've got to try and position the ad that way. But in terms of a digital world where you can reach out to individuals, you don't care how they walk and talk and who they are. It's what they're interested in, what their tastes and preferences are that dominate, and that demographic proxy goes away.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, it kind of is that. Well, here's one. About 1 in 4 people to see Star Wars was a AARP member. They're over 50 years old. Dunkirk, surprisingly, had a very large millennial audience, and it's not based on One Direction style casting. It's because Christopher Nolan was involved, but it was World War II content. And in the broad brushstrokes of mainstream media, where you could only put one message on a bus ad or one TV ad on the Sunday night 60 Minutes episode, you had to make choices and you had to use those broad brushstrokes. Now, when you know that there are those subgroups and you can hit everyone one-to-one based on their preferences, it's a very different look at the audience.
So you're saying more customized?
Very much customized on the individual and what their tastes and preferences and what their propensities are. And just to add, we are a big data company, but for me, big data is really about understanding audiences. A lot of people in white lab coats might stop with the big data being the means to the end, but to me, it always breaks down to a 15-year-old at a box office counter selling tickets to somebody who has limited time and money. So this is all about understanding people, engaging them and getting them to see that the piece of content that's ideal for them in a way that makes them engage with our industry in a really sustainable way.
One of the questions that always tickles me is about the big data and ticket sales and so on, but isn't it all historical, and how much use is that in driving stuff forward? I mean, traditionally, a film script can take years to write.
We talk often about active audience versus passive audience. There are several examples of films in the last 2 years that were produced at high budget from books that were 20 or 30 years old that failed. Why? Because no one knows that book exists anymore. It was really big 20 or 30 years ago. It might have been big for a 10-year period, but today, no one bought that book. So what we always talk about is active audience. We know how many people read a story in the last 30 days, 6 months, 2 years, and that's part of the item that you'll see change. And when you look at the amount of content that a Netflix is producing, they're going with speed to market in a lot of cases because they're making decisions on data. They know if they wait 7 years to make a film, that data is no good anymore. So that is something I think you will see changing, is speed to screen has to change. And that's why you often see the big studios struggling, because they're such big, monolithic machines that cannot make content quickly. And so the people who are fast to screen, that's why digital does so well, because they can move on sometimes something that's a trope that is only going to last that long, but still make a profit from it. So audience is great, and we try not to use the word data because I know development execs get really scared when I say data. We use the word audience as well. Audiences change their mind too. You can't believe an audience from 40 years ago. And that is something that we're always trying to activate on, is active audience, not just audience.
So your micro horror trends, they'll be over by the time the film is made.
No, by next year TIFF it'll still be. But no, it's not something you could sit on. Like we do create trend reports for a lot of our partners where we do an analysis in whether it's a genre, often on certain celebrities that are trending and the stories that are being written about them. We update those every 3 to 6 months. And it's about looking at your window and what you're producing and how you can action on that data. Not every piece of data has to be dealt with in the same way, right? So when we see mass trends like a decrease in vampire content, for example, and an increase in werewolf content over a 2-year period, you can make really broader stroke genre decisions on it. If you're trying to find something that you know is going to be out in 6 months, maybe you activate on dentist horror on that. So it is looking at macro and micro temporal changes in that data as well.
But even though the historic data is out there, it's still a predictor of the future. And so if you look at the average cinema goer, I'm sorry, that's the window I spend most of my time in, so my example is going to be more theatrical. The average cinema goer is going 5 or 6 times. Half the audience is going once a month. That's a lot of recent data that can show people's tastes and preferences and be a really accurate predictor of what they're going to do next. And you can look at that based on overlapping titles and what they've seen historically. And then when you look at the next similar sort of film, there is a linkage there. We have a very smart data science team, much smarter than I'll ever be, who work on this sort of thing. And we started to look at what's the first thing you can do to predict a movie that's coming out in the future. But it still relies on a comp title. There are mathematical formulas we considered, but if you can't say something walks and talks like something somewhat familiar, the odds of that movie breaking through, that piece of content breaking through, is really challenging. And that might be because the industry has educated us as audiences to look for the next franchise and the next sequel, and so we're less trusting of that great piece of original content. But whatever the reason is, it is the fact that people need something to anchor it to, and their recent history is what that is.
And where are you getting your data from?
For us, we tie into cinema exhibitors' loyalty programs. So our particular company looks at 56% of the screens in North America, and we get holistic data on loyalty members. So regardless of where they buy those tickets, it could be on a website, it could be in the theatre, it could be through Fandango or the cinema's own. Regardless of how they pay, we see that. And we see it at the line item level. So I could see whoever went up to the Scotiabank Theatre and bought a ticket to Dunkirk at the 7 o'clock session last night and bought a Coke and a popcorn. And loyalty member data is about 15 to 20% of an exhibitor's customer base. And because they typically buy at least one other ticket, we're looking at 30 to 40% of tickets. So it's a pretty sizable amount of data to make assumptions on.
Would it be better if you could tap directly into Fandango or someone else's ticket sales process?
Look, to be honest, we see that as well, because when you buy in Fandango, it terminates at the exhibitor's point of sale. And so we're visible, we can see Fandango and we can see cash at the box office.
Right.
So we're actually a little more robust.
Got it. I mean, the reason I asked the question is because I'm based in Hong Kong and cover a lot of the Chinese industry. And their ticketing online is 80+% of the business now. Most of that is mobile, and it's going through a small handful of companies who are turning themselves into data companies, but also turning themselves into investors and producers ultimately.
Alibaba's one of those.
Alibaba's one of them, Tencent is another, Weiying is yet another one. And they've rapidly moved up the chain.
Yeah.
But they're seeing an even higher proportion of the numbers. I mean, I'm getting data from Weiying Live on my mobile, which covers, I think it's about 95% of tickets in China.
Yeah,
So
it's amazing.
Does that make them more accurate, or?
In that sort of market, it does. So this is where we look at geographic differences. And in a lot of Western countries in North America, about 1 in 5 tickets is purchased online. So it's a lot less than 95%.
Sure.
And what really drives an online ticket sale is fear of missing out. If you're being asked to pay a booking fee, a surcharge for those tickets, and you know you're going to walk into an empty auditorium with 2 other people in it, you're not going to pre-buy those seats. But if it's night 1 of the new Star Wars film at the ArcLight in Hollywood, you'll be sure to buy those seats online because you'll miss out. So that means unless you have the sort of penetration that they're experiencing in China with 90+%, you're only going to get data profiles on the early days of the big films where people are fearful of missing out. And audiences change over time. This is one of the things we've been able to see, is almost in a predictable way. On opening night of most films, they are fanboys. And I mean that both by age and by gender. By the opening Sunday, the audience is almost 15% more female. And over the course of the film's life, it becomes more female and older, and for the US in particular, different ethnicities start to take hold. And so you want to make sure you have longitudinal data, not just the opening weekend.
Explain.
Because there's a lot to do there.
What are the longitude?
Oh, over the life of the film.
Okay.
Instead of just that first 3 days where everyone's audience looks younger and more male than it is over the life. We just did some work with AARP. And older cinema goers are hugely active. They are going on average around once a month. They don't go on opening night. They don't want to be there on opening night. The theatres are busy. It's noisy. The wrong people are in the auditorium with them. They tend to take 10 to 14 days to go and see the same movie. That doesn't mean they have any less desire to see it. It just means their purchasing habits are different. And a lot of that upfront analysis forgets those audiences because they've switched off the research by then.
I have a question. So, typical movies like at TIFF, independent films, you're talking a lot of bigger movies getting a ticket on opening night. How do you find an audience? How does your data and what you do help predict or again, try to build an audience for a movie that might come out of TIFF?
It's interesting. We
Sorry to
almost
take
see
your
No, that's great.
that's the audience we should be helping more, because you can drop off the hard drive. I was going to drop film cans for a second. Sorry, you can drop the hard drive off at a cinema now for Transformers, and its audience will be there, or it won't. It's taken care of. But it's these gems that you need to find the right people. And that's where finding the purchasing history of other people and what they've done, or what that same person has done previously, can really predict that sort of behavior.
Yeah, you bring up AARP, which, if you guys don't know, that's the kind of, I don't know what it stands for. It's over 50 years old?
Yeah,
Is that the
the
number?
50-plus
AARP,
population.
But they're big moviegoers. So we have a movie here called Chappaquiddick that's going to appeal to exactly that demographic, 50-plus. So the idea of what the title's going to be, who it's going to appeal to, can you broaden out? It's all the things we're discussing right now, and how it can apply to getting a bigger audience. Who are you going to market to? You're going to market to your core. How do you reach them? Older people might not be on social media as much, so it might be more traditional. So that's the future of how I look at things and how things are changing.
Yeah, that particular audience is interesting. They go to the movies a lot, so it's less about I'm horror person or I'm romantic comedy person. It's new movie week, what's out? So you can find those people based on just their love of going to the cinema. And one of the other advantages, I guess, of smaller films is that they will often platform. They'll start on the East and West Coast, hit the next big cities and roll out. And we've worked with a number of smaller distributors to look at the beats. So as it hits those first cinemas, is the audience what you think it is? Is it merging differently? How does that inform the next stage as you in a digital world, are more nimble in your release strategy?
Yeah.
Mark, can I ask you, if I'm going to grossly characterize you as a very successful gut-feeling kind of producer, what research did you do before you greenlit Chappaquiddick?
It's what I brought up before. It started with a great script. It was a spec that we got a hold of early. It ended up on the blacklist after we acquired it. But it was just, you have to fall in love with something, or it becomes something you fall in love with through development. With studios, it was more of a development process. Now in the independent world, a lot of companies don't do a lot of development, so it's a lot of scripts that are out there, specs, and it has to be great. And so the test is, can you get a filmmaker? It's going to make a difference. Can you cast it? And once you start checking those boxes, then you look at your budget level and you do comps but a lot of it's still your gut. I have no idea if people are going to want to see this movie or not. And even the challenges at a studio when I was there, it's our movies tended to test really highly, and especially with older people and women. And I did a lot of sports films, so how do you get a woman into that? They're not typically going to go to those movies at a cinema. They'll find it over the course of the life of a film, but how do you get them in? How do you get them in opening weekend? Because everything's a multiple of your opening weekend. That's your marketing from the time you lead up with your marketing, and then those are all your disciples out there. Hopefully you have good scores and good cinema exits, but it's how do you keep that and have nice long legs? But you're all a multiple that opening weekend. It's all the challenge. And Disney used to say, how do we get people to go to that movie on opening weekend, or drive and go to the theater rather than waiting and seeing it on cable or wherever? So that's the challenge of box office compared to what they're doing with the streamers and everything else. They don't have to worry about opening weekends. They can reach the audience.
But that same audience can help you opening weekend. And I'll go back to the glass room. if you didn't think that the audience had to learn everything about your film opening night because you would ruin it by putting too much content out there, it really changes how you build an audience. It really changes the people that you can address to get to that movie, no matter what the topic is. Because to your point earlier, psychographic is now more, I mean, it's how we suggest your next book. We don't look at your age, we look at what you read last. And if all you read was werewolf stuff, then you'll get more werewolf stuff. If you love, doesn't matter how old you are, that is what you're gonna get. So if you build that audience and trust that the audience you're building is actually excited, I'll give you like real world. We publish physical books, and the whole story's for free on Wattpad still, and they're bestsellers around the world. Why? Like the whole story's there. It's edited a bit, it's changed a bit. So why not release more of the story? Why not release sizzle? Why not release script pages and build an audience and find who's responding to it? Even if you're not going to change your development process, this is just marketing at this point. And if you trust that the audience loves what you are creating, they will come support you when it comes out in the medium that you want to be supported in. And it's a big change from how, I mean, first of all, for smaller independent pictures, it is hard to find that audience and have the budget to sometimes access them. I give that. But there's a point where, whether it's TV, film, gaming, that opening day is where everyone really learns what your story is. And I think that has to change as well, because that will help you bring an audience. And you're right, you do need a filmmaker to love your script, but if you tell the filmmaker, also this has 1 million people that already like it, so you have a better chance of it being a successful film, that's an even bigger incentive for those creators to come on to your project. So it is about building audience throughout the process, instead of just waiting for box office and then using that as your multiple. You can actually start building that multiple much earlier in the process these days.
A couple of you have mentioned independents and studios, and this question is really going to be about who does the future belong to? Does it belong to Amazon and Netflix? Can the Hollywood studios catch up, or is it going to be social media companies, data-driven companies like yours?
Well, obviously it's going to be.
Obviously it belongs to you. No,
But
okay,
other
you
than-
can't
other
answer.
than
You
me?
can't
Oh, why
answer
didn't
that.
I say so? Look, I think there's this really amazing thing happening in the entertainment industry, and we get to watch it firsthand. All of us do. We have all these big monolithic studios racing towards being digital. I'm not even sure they know what that means, because being digital doesn't mean anything anymore. And then you have all these digital players, and not even Netflix and Amazon, but the full screens and the Awesomeness TVs, who are rushing to be big studios. And these two cultures are clashing, where you have people like major studios launching specific Snapchat studio arms, or Facebook now purchasing content all over the place. I think their viewing tab went live in the US like 2 or 3 days ago. So I think what you're seeing is everyone trying to figure out their place. And there'll be studios, they'll be the majors, and they will, some of them will figure it out, some of them won't. But just because you started in digital doesn't also mean you're going to be successful. Digital players are finding they're having library problems. I have this amazing service that I want to charge you $7.99 for, but I only have ever made 10 shows. Well, then I'm just going to go pay for Netflix because they got 50,000 shows. So they're all having different issues, and it's not like going digital is solving everyone's problems. Digital players are having big problems too. But it is a really interesting time where you're watching that, almost the two sides rushing past each other, where they're ending up in the middle. And people like the Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu's, they seem to have a good system where they're kind of broadly in that middle sector right now. But you're already seeing, as they bring in more people from the traditional industry, they're changing some of the ways they develop. Netflix has a very clear way that they buy content. The way they finance it, the way it has to be packaged. Amazon and Hulu started there, they're already changing that. They're already acting more traditional. They're doing more in-house development than. So I don't think you're going to see anything except tectonic shift for the next several years, as everyone tries to figure out what the word digital, or not even digital, what the word content consumption means in the year 2017 plus.
Yeah, I think studios are going to take less chances. I think they're going to be mostly eventized films, or like a New Line, has movie It coming out that's going to be huge, right? So they're going to pretty much stay in their lane that they feel like they're good at. I think the streamers can take a lot more chances with content because they're not worried about box office. They're driving subscription And that's the difference, right? How it's going to continue to evolve. And then you have your independents, and they're kind of taking that middle movie that kind of studios aren't doing anymore. So they're going to become more specific, but then also it just things pop up when someone leaves a certain thing, something comes up behind it to take that to take its place. But you know, it's all about content and how much people can, how much physically they can watch or see or go to a movie. There's great things being you know, created on the streamers, and it's really convenient, and everyone's got a flat screen and a sound system. So, you know, you're fighting what's going to get somebody to a movie, and that's going to be the secret sauce of certainly an independent filmmaker, of like what kind of movie that you're going to make is going to be able to kind of get through the clutter.
I mean, for me, everyone's got a shot at winning, but the winners will probably be those that are connected and informed. So they're connected to audiences. They know what's going on in the world. They're watching the structure change. And through that information and that connection, that feedback loop, they're able to adjust. You know, everyone from a 100-year-old studio to a startup from yesterday has access to the same information. But are they willing to connect to it? Are they willing to process it? And are they willing to change, to adapt to what is out there? If they're not, be they the funkiest, newest startup that's hot today or that 100-year-old studio, they can both fail. If they listen, they can both succeed.
Mark, you said the word risk, and you know, you do see it in studios making bigger and bigger bets because they're marketing machines and they know that they can put a P&A against a big film and hopefully recoup. But they have to inevitably use data and audience to reduce that risk, and that's why they're going to use audience.
They're trying. I wouldn't say they're great at it yet, you know, because I sat in meetings and it's like you had the kind of digital side, and they'll hire outside companies, and they're trying to figure it out, but
they haven't yet.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
we will be the first to tell you because we are in those rooms too.
Well, I think, you know, irrespective of the incumbent studios or the new players, content remains to be the core of the industry and quality, right? So even if it's Netflix or Hulu or some of the other players, everyone's chasing quality content. So the folks here, that's great news, I think, irrespective of the delivery medium. But I do think eventually, you know, looking longer term, there will be new crop of creators and studios that are going to come up. And these creators are going to go after emerging technologies such as AR or VR. So if you look at some of the studios in the US or here in Canada that are going after these emerging and nascent technologies because they're getting a head start. They're building essentially a studio from ground up because these technologies are nascent, they're not so well understood. And their means of getting ahead of the curve is to go after these types of spaces. Yes, it's going to take time, and it's not going to happen overnight. But as I look longer term, there will be a lot of opportunity on the creative side to build new types of creative processes and studios and businesses behind them that will eventually provide, you know, not only great business models, but also deliver great content.
You're a professional investor. Where have you put your money?
So you know, I'm a technology investor. So I've done one investment in a VR film studio, actually out of Montreal, called Felix and Paul Studios. And you know, part of the thesis is, as a venture investor, content is a tough category to invest in, mainly because we invest in technologies or softwares that see scale very quickly, and essentially you make your money by selling software at a global scale. In content, that becomes challenging, unless you use data and predictive technologies that can help you with that. In content, that becomes challenging because a lot of times it becomes, for smaller independent studios, it becomes a one-hit business. So until you have that and you demonstrate success, you don't know if there's a viable business model. So from a venture perspective, content is tough, but when we look at augmented reality or virtual reality or mobile, we start to see an intersection of content creation and technology. And that's when things get interesting because you need both of those categories to evolve hand in hand and evolve quickly to see how things will shape up. So hence we've started to look at areas where there's a huge underlying technology element to a studio that helps them differentiate not only on identifying what type of content will be successful, but also creating it, post-production processes, and then eventually delivering it.
Different question for all of you. How much are we restricted by language? I mean, is Movio and Wattpad essentially English language, and therefore you're reinforcing an English language point of view and not reaching out to other parts of the world?
So Wattpad supports 56 different languages. our top 5 countries, and they change a little bit, are US, Philippines, Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, UK, and that switches around a lot. We have the #1 youth TV show in the Philippines in its 6th season called Wattpad Presents, all in Taglish, combination of Tagalog and English. Purely based on data, we choose the biggest story in a week, produced in a 4 by 22-minute miniseries that plays over a week, next story. In fact, a producer came in, stopped using the data, went with his gut, ratings dropped. He left the project, see what I'm doing there? Went back to the data and the ratings shot back up, so it was a great proof point. But we are absolutely international. In fact, only 25% is domestic, and by the end of the year, Spanish will be the most written language on our platform, overtaking English.
And we're in 35 different countries all around the world. So similarly, it's not as language isn't as important as we've got a bunch of different nationalities and a bunch of different tastes represented through how people have spent their time and money. So whether it's an English language film or a local production, we've got that global perspective.
That's very interesting to me because I talk a lot to the North American studios, and I often wonder if they're reinforcing their existing domestic plus international point of view. And in fact, that came up in an interview recently with one of the Chinese investors who's got tens of millions of dollars invested in a Hollywood studio, and he was furious with them. They're just producing for a North American English language audience. They still haven't. They've taken our money, but they still haven't learnt the lesson. That there's, a fifth of the world is Chinese, and there's almost a fifth of the world is Indian pop, and so on. You're nodding, Prashant. I mean,
we see it more in TV, I think, than in film. I personally, we've seen it a little more in TV than film, where international is now the original play, and it's great if you sell it domestically, but that's not actually what we're doing. And so what becomes interesting about what we look at is we know the top 5 countries something's been read in. So even if it's written in English, we know that, actually we have a digital series coming out in India where the top story in India happened to be written in English by a woman from the Philippines who lived in New Zealand. Like, that's all from data. Like, that's the only way we found it. So to your point, whether it actually doesn't matter the nationality, it doesn't matter the country you're in, it's what content are you attaching yourself to. And then when we make decisions on financing, selling, producing is, all right, great, we know where our #1 country is, but where are number 2, 3, and 4 country, right? So, and you can start making those decisions now, which was next to impossible. And to your point, a lot of Hollywood studios do produce what they know. They produce for the audience that's in their backyard. But in TV, you are seeing things like Young Pope or Cardinal here in Canada, where decisions are being made to treat international audiences as #1 and then look back to domestic.
Got it. I think we are ready for the lights to come up a little bit and the microphones to start walking around, and somebody is going to volunteer and be my first question. Microphones, this one first. I've been told where the microphones are. Thank you. We'll try and go left, right. Your question, please.
Hi, my name is Christina. Hi, I'm a fellow Aussie, so
Nice.
salute.
There we go.
Thank you, gentlemen, for all your really interesting points. I used to work for a screen agency, and what we would do to disrupt dialogues was we wouldn't fund sessions with all-male panels.
Sorry.
That's a good idea.
So,
This program was programmed by a lady.
So my question is, what are each of your companies doing to disrupt male-focused conversations or stories or characters?
It's a good question.
So, first of all, 70% of Wattpad is female. That's our demographic. We're highly female. But as we're producing, we are always looking to work with people who give our content the right treatment. We work with, we have a project we're doing right now where we are working with female filmmakers specifically because that is what our writers want, that is what their audience wants, and we want that view on our content. So whether it's female, male, or diversity, any type of diversity, one of our biggest writers has mental health issues that she's very public about, some that the industry would never have taken a look at, but because of the data behind her, they took her very seriously, and there'll be movie announcements around what she's doing shortly. So audience is helping us break down those walls because they're telling us that they want these things. that an all-male panel is a terrible idea today. Sorry, it's true, guys. Like, it is not smart to have done this because audience tells us that's not right. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to be vigilant to make sure we're not using our gut in places we shouldn't and that we listen to the audience so it doesn't give us a pass. But the audience is telling us that's what they want. They want diverse characters, they want diverse voices, they want diverse views on things. They're kind of sick of the way things have been done for 100 years.
Thank you. I'm going to go this side now.
Hello, my name is Brennan. I'm a filmmaker from here in Toronto. I was wondering, with all this data-driven content being created, is there any point when, I understand there's some films like, for instance, La La Land last year, which nobody in Hollywood wanted to fund until they found the right producers, because nobody said musicals are going to make any money. It's a money sink. But it made something like $400 million last year. So is anywhere in your data sets looking for those specific things? Like, would WordPad be open to a musical, or is that possible with your platform?
Yeah, I mean, for what we look at, for breakout films to occur, almost by definition, you need non-core cinema goers to come along. A film can't make $400 million with the same bunch of people who go once every month. You need to bring in occasional and infrequent cinema goers. So again, if you wanted to see what the opportunities were out there, you would look at those people who come less often. You would look at what they've engaged with, and you would try and find something that might suit their tastes. You know, I think, Mark, you were talking about all the competition of getting people off the couch. Let's see what stories can be told in a big screen environment, in a collective social experience, not in the isolation of their homes. And films like La La Land can demonstrate that that can be done. Similarly, films like Deadpool can prove that you can pull people who don't typically see comic book films in as well. It's at different ends of the spectrum. But to me, box office is a proxy for people giving up their time and their money. If you want more box office, see who isn't being spoken to, who isn't being engaged. And if you do that, then it's still a very, very viable way to tell and share a story.
Aren't there also other ways of looking at that? Instead of looking at from genre, you can look at the stars or other factors. So, you know, Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling is a pairing that people want to see.
Absolutely. And we looked at it almost...
And they'd go and see them in a musical or maybe even a horror movie.
Well, we looked at it on the flip side. You know, again, going back to that AARP review that we did, we've identified a genre that had been building up really on the back of Liam Neeson and Taken. It's mature action heroes. Pierce Brosnan, Sean Penn, Liam Neeson. You mightn't like it, but Ben Affleck and Tom Cruise have graduated into that group as well. And these people are action heroes from 10, 20 years ago, and their audiences have stayed with them. So it's a really viable audience. To your point about casting, though, we had a look at, there was a recent film called Collision. It starred Nicholas Hoult. By all appearances, it was a mature action film, but they stapled a younger star in to see whether there would be a bigger box office for it. Not only did they not, because they kind of bastardized what worked, they didn't just not get the younger crowd, they whittled down the core crowd. So that's sort of looking at that casting decision and some somewhat cynical plays to say, if we colour by numbers, can we then get a new market? And it shows that the audience sniffs cynicism. It sniffs a lack of authenticity, at least in that example.
I think some Hollywood greenlighting committees should listen to that. This side.
Thank you for your time, but also I never thought of data quite as inspiring as I'm leaving this session with. And so I'm wondering, as somebody who teaches screenwriting and writes myself and so on, where do we access it?
Great question.
I would say as a screenwriter, what have you posted to a community lately? I mean, there's the most grassroots thing, especially as a creator, is to try to find your own audience. You've seen, whether it's our writers or YouTube celebrities, they put their art out there and got that instant feedback. But even if, as a screenwriter, you posted a short story on Wattpad and 200 people read it and gave you feedback, that is more than 99.99% of screenwriters ever got data back on that piece, on their writing. That puts you one step ahead of all of, you know who those 200 people are. They will help you workshop in a way you've never had something workshop. So data isn't always about a billion points collected every day. Sometimes it's just getting 1,000 people to say, yeah, this is great, but why is it set in Montana?
And I would say, as you do that, in script writing, sometimes people can be protective. Obviously, it's content, it's ideas, but having your story out there, not only you'll get feedback, you can iterate on it, and that's what helped a lot of folks, come up with great ideas and stories, and see how that can be then taken to producers or financiers.
I've got a follow-up question. I mean, is crowdfunding still relevant to the script development process, or has it all transitioned to apps and more formal community groups like yours?
We still think crowdfunding is viable. Audiences can vote in a lot of ways. They can vote by clicking a heart, and they can vote with $1. And so intent through dollars is still great. Kickstarters and the Indiegogos still have their place, and it gives audiences, it's really about giving audience ownership over a process. The more they feel they own that process, it's like when you see a band at like some really crappy dive bar, but then they're playing at a massive stadium, like that's your band forever. Like I found that's my band. Same thing. If you let an audience feel they helped create it, they will support it through its life cycle. So crowdfunding absolutely still has a place.
Yeah, and I think we've seen it work in some of the other industries, and I think it's hugely applicable in media and entertainment. And absolutely, we'll see more and more success stories coming out of stories that are funded by people around the world, and it could be an avenue like Kickstarter or something else.
Great. Question over here. Someone's got the microphone already. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Jane. I'm Canadian, and this is, I think, such an essential conversation, not only to get perspective from all of you, but also to keep the film industry alive and kicking. I'm a researcher, been a market researcher for 25 years, and I think what all of you have to say has merit. Go with your gut, qual versus quant, all that stuff. But I also believe that your research is only as good and accurate and timely and relevant as the questions you ask. So given that, I'd like to know, within the next 1 to 3 years, what keeps you up at night? What's going to keep you up at night the next 1 to 3 years? What are your biggest challenges in each of your fields?
Aaron.
Look, for me, as somebody who represents the cinema industry, it's that the industry still focuses solely on that. When they think of what they do, it's the screen, and it's the seats, and it's the facilities, and it's not doing a 180, literally a 180, from the screen and the facilities to the people sitting in the seats. If we don't think about people, this industry up until relatively recently was, if you build it largely, they'll come. Maybe not every movie, but on a macro basis, they'll come. And you could have sticky floors and overcharged, limited food and beverage items. Now you've got to think of the person. And it starts with a 15-year-old selling a ticket, and it starts with clean bathrooms, and it starts with an experience that takes the edges off the content, because you want people who have paid for the babysitter, driven downtown, bought their ticket to see a movie that mightn't have connected with them as much as they'd hoped, to still say, you know what, that movie wasn't where I wanted it, but this is a great experience. I'm here with my friends, I'm here with my family, I'm enjoying it, or maybe not enjoying it, but in a collective experience, and that's still worth my time and money. So if we focus that way and not this way, that's what keeps me up.
I think for me, it's when will Netflix eventually figure out what things to recommend to me and do it properly. But in all seriousness, as an investor and a passionate person in this industry, I would say the way the world's changing across every single step of the value chain, and to me, it's what technologies are driving that. And it could be on the creative side, it could be on the production side, it could be on the distribution side. And if you think about startups around the world, there's essentially hundreds of them in every single category trying to disrupt this industry. And it's not just about investing in them, it's also supporting them and helping them. Yes, they're going after studios or incumbents, but how can we help these entrepreneurs and folks like yourselves get that exposure to the industry so that we can all work together and yes, changes will happen, but it's all for good.
I think we have time for one more question, and that's going down the front.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys. This is like, I'm thinking this would be the best coffee meeting. Everyone, all the focus here. I wanted to sort of ask a question that kind of applies to most of what you're saying. It's the data collation. And you're saying there's a predictive model of using that, which is for film and cinema release. I'm thinking about the TV shows and maybe the prescriptive use of it, how quickly you can take that data and tell the writers to do this and that, how long that takes, but maybe specifically as it pertains to gaming. So that's kind of like 3 questions, but gaming is, as you know, is huge. There's a point where the data collation is there, you can predict, there's ancillary revenues, et cetera. Maybe your experiences with gaming as it applies to these data collation models.
So from our standpoint, there's 2 ways that we interact with gaming. First of all, as a platform who needs to grow, who needs to always bring in more audience, 60 million plus users a month is great, but we'd prefer 1 billion. We use a lot of gaming technique even to market ourselves and the content, and knowing, okay, well, this is where you're dropping off of stories of this genre. Let's make sure you don't see that and see if your continuation through that content is longer if we change the genre a little bit on you. So we're using it for retention reasons and all that. But absolutely, we are starting to work in the gaming industry where we can have that choose your own adventure experience, where even though the writer wrote their story one way, we can go back to our writer and say, now we need you to write 4 different endings. To flip that around, whether it's TV or gaming, we're also doing things where we're taking our top writers, and a network or a studio knows there's a white space that they need to fill, or the ARP knows there's a piece of content, but you can't find that dusty manuscript. Let's ask 300 super influential writers to all give us some log lines and choose 10 of them to do synopsis and have 5 of them write it in public, and then option the one that actually got the most resonance with an audience. So we're using gaming techniques to grow ourselves. We're working with gaming companies to help build better storylines and underlying IP, and then we're helping using almost gaming techniques to find new IP overall.
Prashant?
Yeah, I think one thing gaming sector does really well is analyzing the way their users engage with the game. So if it's for a shooter game, they understand why a certain individual is doing what they're doing. And based on that, they iterate their environments that folks play games in. And there are a lot of applications of that in the film and storytelling side of things. Eventually, to an example here, folks will be able to direct how they want to direct their story. So if I'm watching something, based on how I react to a certain scenario, that story will change. It's further down the road, but things like that can be applied to I think, the entertainment and on the film side of things.
Great. I think that is time. I shall thank our 4 gentlemen panelists and thank the audience for listening. I know that there are many more questions and many ideas. I have 7 pages of questions. Grab the panelists afterwards, but we're going to have to clear the stage. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Karina's here.
Thank you. You guys can leave.
Oh, we can leave.
Thank you. And that was the only all-male panel that we have here at the conference. Next up at 1:30, we have 3 dynamic Indigenous women speaking about the creation of Canada's Indigenous Screen Office. If you are here, you are at the next session. It's going to be incredible. Thank you so much.